centuries. You don't know where you land. It's so dark in mythology. Treasures of history to be found. Hear the legends of time. All the handiworks remain. Only the dream away. Orion, Orion,
The change between seasons 6 and 7 was the single biggest change the show went through in the classic series. The only bigger change in the show's entire history happened when the show returned in 2005. Season 7 ran from the 3rd of January until the 20th of June 1970, and you would be forgiven for not realizing it was the same show that was on 6 months earlier. I'm not going to list all the changes, but here's a few. It's suddenly in colour. The Doctor went from the Chaplin-esque short and funny Patrick Troughton to the tall, serious, flashy, and possibly inspired by Adam Adamant John Pertwee. The entire setup of the show had suddenly changed from travels around the universe to being earthbound, with the Doctor assisting the military against aliens that attack the Earth. You don't even have the same companion as the last season, so that continuity safety net is gone. Even the theme music's changed. Admittedly, not by that much, so it could have been worse. Or at least more different.
Through cosmic waste the TARDIS flies, to taste the secret source of life. A presence science can't deny exists, within, outside, behind, the latitude of human minds. I am the Doctor.
I can only wonder what the hell went through the audience's mind at the time. I mean, apart from all that, John Pertwee was mostly a radio comedy actor. So even if you knew about the rest of the changes, you'd most likely be going into this expecting more comedy. And then bam! Arguably the most serious incarnation of the Doctor. Frankly, the fact that Pertwee's era was the most successful the show had ever been until this point is baffling. Well, it would be if it wasn't for the stories being quite as strong as they are. The companion this season was Liz Shaw. She's one of the companions who break the mold a bit by being extremely intelligent, and by never travelling in the TARDIS. This, of course, is made up for in the movie Prometheus, where Liz Shaw travels to alien planets and is really fucking stupid. Also hanging about are Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart, father of Kate Stewart from the new series, and Sergeant Benton. They're both soldiers that the Doctor assists against alien invasions and related stuff. There are only 4 stories this season, but they make up for that by having 3 of them be 7 parts long. This is by far the shortest season thus far. We open up with the 4-part Spearhead from space. The Doctor falls out of the TARDIS having just regenerated off-screen. Now, there are arguments about whether the second Doctor regenerated immediately at the end of the War Games, or was grabbed by the Time Lord Secret Service to do missions. I myself am definitely in the of course Season 6B fucking happened camp, and I'll talk about it at length when we get to Season 22. So the Doctor's grabbed by UNIT just in time for an alien invasion. The villain of the story is the Nestine Consciousness, a semi-formless, sometimes made of plastic intelligence that has the ability to control plastic with its sometimes disembodied mind. If this sounds familiar, it's because they were the first aliens fought in New Who. It's easy to see why. The idea of living plastic trying to kill the crap out of you is just as effective now as it was back then. Maybe more. Apart from this being a classic, this is one of the best looking stories in the show's history. Mostly because there were behind-the-scenes issues and they couldn't shoot it on the usual videotape. And since they couldn't just drop the story because it was the relaunch, they had to shoot it all on film, and on location rather than sets. And it looks just fucking great. It's so good looking that it's likely going to be the only piece of Classic Who ever to be released on Blu-ray. This was officially the start of Robert Holmes' Doctor Who godhood. He made up for the Space Pirates and the Crotons in one fell swoop. He is the best writer in the show's history, and from now until the death of the 5th Doctor, he's mostly in his A-game. The second story of the season introduced another important race from the new show, the Silurians. The name of the story is Doctor Who and the Silurians, but mostly it just gets shortened to the Silurians, which is a much better title, and causes minimal ranting from me about the Doctor's fucking name. This story was pretty much remade in New Who as The Hungry Earth and Cold Blood. People find hibernating Silurians under the ground, they wake up, shit happens and it's humans versus reptiles. Ooh! But there are a few differences. 1. The look of the Silurians. While in this, the Silurians might look like fairly ludicrous pieces of prosthetic, I honestly prefer this design over the one from New Who, and it comes down to one issue. These guys don't look human. At all. In New Who, they have human-looking eyes, and the female Silurians are smaller than the males, and have obvious tits. Now, I'm fairly sure I don't need to explain why that's stupid. The new series even went as far as creating a prototype for their update of the classic Silurian look. And it's great! Alas, they decided to play it safe. And stupid. It's a real shame. In Cold Blood, they could have had all the Silurians played by men, and had a nice moment for the kids where they find out that the captured one was a female. And the Doctor could point out that sexual dimorphism is not the same across different species. It would be a message of not judging a book by its cover. But no, we get reptiles with tits, who wear clothes because naked reptiles would have been too much for the audience, or too expensive, or too something else. And 2, the outcome in Doctor Who and the Silurians is bleak and much more realistic than the Hungry Earths. It's not at all hopeful, which I fucking loved.
What's that?
Brigadier. He's blown up a Silurian base. That's murder.
The story is 7 episodes long, and it's another good one. This season is full of slightly more realistic stories, and this one's no exception. The third story is the 7-part Ambassadors of Death, where some astronauts have returned to Earth, but they never remove their helmets, and they keep killing people with radiation. Clearly, something's going on. From a story that was pretty much remade in New Who, to some aliens that have pretty much been visually recreated twice in New Who. I am of course talking about the Impossible Astronaut and Silence in the Library. Don't worry, those have nothing to do with these guys beyond the imagery of evil spacesuits causing trouble. I only mention it because it's a good image. This is another good and mostly grounded story. There's an evil general seeking to cause an intergalactic war, and some lowlifes seeking to use aliens as terrorist weapons. They were originally supposed to be Irish, and then someone remembered that the Troubles were happening. Yeah! Anyway, the Doctor has removed his console from the TARDIS, and I'd love to know exactly how. He intends to use it in any experiments he feels the need to run. Though mostly he just uses it to try and fix the TARDIS so he can fucking escape the Earth. I get the feeling that the Doctor feels about the Earth the same way I feel about much of the Jon Pertwee era. It's good, it's solid, it's fun, it's very well made. It's just a bit samey. This is the story where Sergeant Benton, the 4th part of the so-called Unit family, was officially introduced. In the last story of Season 7, which again aptly is 7 parts, the Doctor thinks he's fixed the TARDIS, but finds himself sent sideways in time and space and into the show's first parallel universe. It's the usual generic parallel universe setup. Everyone good in the main show is evil in the alternate reality. They couldn't give the Brigadier a goatee, so he makes do with an eye patch. And Liz wears a black wig and dresses like a fetish Nazi. Or as close as you could get to it in family TV in the 70s. It's a very good look. In both universes, people are drilling the deepest hole in human history. You might think this was a really random thing for them both to be doing, and you'd be right. But in real life, this was inspired by a Russian attempt to do the same thing, which was suddenly abandoned, and no one exactly knew why. I'm sure we now know it was because they didn't want to release the Rachnos, but in the 70s it was a mystery, and the best answer they could come up with was A. You'll come across liquid that turns you into blue werewolves with a thing for extreme heat. Yes, this was the worst looking monster in a great Doctor Who story. At least until season 21. And B. If you keep drilling you will destroy the planet, which is a much better fate than awful makeup and acting like a fucking idiot. So in the alternate reality they're slightly further ahead in the drilling, and the Doctor's efforts to stop them do exactly bullshit. So it's bye-bye to evil fascist alternate Earth. But will he get home in time to save his own? Well, obviously. This is my favourite Pertwee story. Everything except for the evil Primords is brilliant. Making the Doctor watch helplessly as a world almost exactly the same as his be destroyed in a fire, knowing his TARDIS console can only travel with one person, is just horrific. He has to convince people that know that he can't save them to let him go and save people that they don't give a shit about. I can't imagine New Who being this brave, but I really hope it is one day. This is the next best thing to actually destroying the Earth. It affects him badly. A world destroyed in fire becomes his worst nightmare. Which makes the Time War even worse now, you know that, doesn't it? One last thing about the alternate reality. We never found out where the alternate reality Doctor was, or who he was, but it's been suggested that he was actually their Big Brother figure, the dictator portrayed in several posters. Now if that's true, that's just fucking beautiful. The evil alternate reality Doctor gets exiled to Earth by evil alternate reality Time Lords and sets about setting himself up as the Lord of Earth. Then it pretty much immediately gets blown up for no reason at all. Probably just as he was putting the finishing touches to a makeshift TARDIS-like ship he was using the Earth's resources to build so he could escape. The special effects are still mostly terrible, but now they don't have the black and white to hide it. Much of the practically filmed stunt work is better than the stuff you'd see in New Who. Admittedly, that's mostly because they went to real locations and found people willing to throw themselves off tall things for small paychecks. So watching this era when you're used to the new show can be a little weird. The stuff that New Who is great at, special effects, are terrible here, but the stuff that New Who is not so good at, realistic-looking practical stunts, are fucking amazing here. It's a bit like a parallel universe, really. See what I did there? Yeah, I'm smooth. It's an interesting dynamic to have supporting characters other than the companion, and Liz Shaw is just great. Now Liz Shaw didn't appear in the show after this story. Caroline John left the show and was replaced by Jo Grant, the second of the 4 iconic companions of Classic Who. She's blonde, bubbly, and stupid. In short, she's the perfect generic Doctor Who companion. Liz Shaw reappeared in novels, audios, and even some unofficial stories where she worked for the Preternatural Research Bureau, or Probe. Basically the UK's very low-budget version of the X-Files made by Doctor Who fans. Season 7 was very good. No bad stories at all, just a bit samey in places. 3 of the stories were also a bit long at 7 episodes. I would have rather they shrank Silurians and Ambassadors of Death to 5 parts each and given us another 4-parter. But the long stories, like the Exile to Earth, were a side effect of the need to save money. So I can understand why they did what they did. Season 7 is one of those bits where it's very easy to jump into Classic Who. So if you really want a place to start, don't mind the 70s-ness or long stories, but you can't quite handle black and white, I'd say this is as good a place as any to start. If you can handle black and white, then feel free to begin with An Unearthly Child. Or you could just watch these guys and check out the stories that sound the most interesting. Now this is for the one person who will point this out. Sergeant Benton was played by John Levine, who played a unit corporal in The Invasion with Patrick Troughton. So hypothetically, that might have been where he was introduced and not the Ambassadors of Death. It doesn't really matter, though. Anyway, join me soon for Season 8 when they introduce the Master. And honestly, sometimes it feels like he'll never leave.
Measure the mystery and the sound without taking up time. So the handiworks remain only a dream around.
Shoes.
They seem to be worrying him, sir.
Are these what you're looking for? I wonder if the brain's damaged.
He does seem to be behaving very erratically.